Dear friends, I believe this video will be the most important I've created so far on my channel, and its title perfectly reflects the importance of what I want to share with you. In previous videos, we attempted to understand the purpose of the numerous strange details found inside and outside the pyramids, as well as determine the primary method of lifting blocks used by the builders of these grandiose structures. And the more information I analyzed while creating these videos, the more confident I became that some very simple, general principle must underlie all these details and patterns. That all Egyptian pyramids are, above all, a single sequence of structures united by a common design concept and common construction methods. And if we want to unravel the mystery of the Great Pyramids, we first need to understand this basic principle, to find this idea common to all pyramids, and only then delve into the numerous details and nuances. And now you'll see that understanding this idea, finding this key, is actually not at all difficult. It doesn't require high-tech scans or measurements or the use of expensive equipment or specialists. All you need to do is look at the existing information from a slightly different angle. Make yourself comfortable. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll tell you about the basic designing principle of the Great Pyramids of ancient Egypt. But for the sake of completeness, I'd like to begin a little from afar with a general yet very important question. Consider for a moment why there's so much discussion and debate surrounding the Egyptian pyramids, so many theories and versions of their purpose. I think the answer is obvious. These structures are completely different from what we're used to seeing, both inside and outside. Nowhere else will you see such sloping corridors, such chambers over 15 meters high. Nowhere else will you find such a strange interior layout, which, what's more, constantly changes from pyramid to pyramid. We don't design or build like that. We don't arrange interior spaces like that. We don't raise the entrance to a room 10 meters high. And we wouldn't even think of connecting two corridors in a way that would guarantee a 100% chance of breaking your neck while moving through them. Our buildings don't have vertical tunnels leading into the rooms, and the entrance to the corridor isn't located on the ceiling. And I believe that if we truly want to get to the bottom of this, we must first answer the following question. How is it that these enormous ancient structures are filled with nothing but mysteries? What motivated the pyramid builders to create such incomprehensible structures? Some Egyptologists attribute this to the ancient Egyptians' religious beliefs, attempting to find cultic or symbolic meanings in all these oddities. Others argue that the builders had a logic of their own, incomprehensible to us. Proponents of alternative theories, meanwhile, are convinced that the pyramids are technological devices and that this explains all the oddities. However, I am sure that there is another, much more rational option. It is that the overwhelming majority of the patterns and details of the pyramid's internal structure are directly related to their construction. That is, all these strange principles of the internal layout with its sloping corridors, all this precision in many aspects, the choice of building materials, and many other patterns and nuances are an integral part of the construction process of these structures. And if so, then this completely changes the rules of the game. As is known, not a single document has been found to date that mentions the construction of the Great Pyramids. But if this idea is correct, then these structures themselves contain all the information we need. We just have to learn to properly understand these ancient messages created thousands of years ago using millions of tons of stone. One of the main mysteries of the Great Pyramids is their constantly changing internal structure. The chambers within them are sometimes located below ground level, sometimes near the surface, sometimes elevated high above. This is very strange, since, as is well known, most cultures have very conservative funerary traditions. In fact, this is also characteristic of the culture of ancient Egypt. The mastabas of the early dynasties were built according to a specific principle, which of course changed slightly over time. But the point is that this process occurred gradually, rather than through constant and radical changes. The same can be said about the pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties, which were built after the Great Pyramids. They are much smaller, have almost the same dimensions, and at some point in time, their internal structure generally comes to a single pattern. That is, we see this logical principle of gradual development in all ancient Egyptian architecture in general and in the ancient Egyptian pyramids in particular. In almost all of them, except the Great Pyramids of the 4th dynasty. How did this happen? Scientists explain this phenomenon by the desire to experiment, and this explanation seems, to put it mildly, not entirely justified. After all, experimenting, even if you need to for some reason, is much easier on small pyramids than on large ones, because the cost of inevitable mistakes during the construction process will be much lower. And here we come to the key point. I will now show you that, in fact, all the changes in the internal structure of the Great Pyramids are by no means random, but rather fit into a single logical chain and have a completely rational explanation. Before you now is a series of pyramids, unofficially referred to as the Great Pyramids. These are the 3 pyramids of Pharaoh Snefru, Meidum, Bent, and Red, and the 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau, those of Pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. They also sometimes add to them the Pyramid of Djoser and 2 pyramids, of which only pits now remain. These are the pyramids at Abu-Rawash and Zawiyet el-Aryan. Both of these pyramids also date back to the 4th dynasty. So we see that all these pyramids have different sizes, a different number of chambers, and different positions of these chambers. The corridors, accordingly, are also arranged differently. What could be the meaning of this, you ask? Actually, it's very simple to understand. But we're just looking at these pyramids a little incorrectly. They shouldn't be compared like this, but this way, aligning them precisely by the level of their apexes. Now you'll see how much we can learn using this simple technique. Let's compare the Khufu pyramid and the Bent pyramid in this way. Simply superpose their drawings. We see that both systems of the Bent pyramid almost exactly align horizontally with the upper chambers of the Khufu pyramid. You must admit, this is a very strange coincidence for what would seem to be 2 completely different internal structures of these pyramids. Now, the Red pyramid. And again, we see a nearly exact alignment of the chambers. The Meidum pyramid. The same result. This can't possibly be a simple coincidence. This clearly tells us that the internal systems of these pyramids were designed with the chambers at equal distances from the pyramid's apex. Why would the ancient builders have needed this? Let's compare the pyramids in this way and try to trace the logic of their development. The first was the step pyramid of Djoser. It was built in several stages, but the most interesting thing is that beneath this pyramid is a huge shaft, almost 30 meters deep. We'll skip the next 2 pyramids, those of the pharaohs Sekhemkhet and Kaaba, as they were unfinished. And then came the Meidum pyramid, the first of the 3 pyramids of the pharaoh Snefru. It was the first to feature a sloping corridor, created directly within the pyramid's masonry. Let's superimpose the drawings of the Pyramid of Djoser and the Pyramid of Meidum. Notice how this comparison reveals that the Meidum pyramid is, in a sense, an expanded version of the Pyramid of Djoser, only expanded not at the top, but at the bottom. It's as if a lower section had been added. Moreover, the lowest point of the vertical shaft of the Pyramid of Djoser perfectly aligns with the lower section of the corridor of the Meidum pyramid. And we see in the drawing that this section is located in a small pit, cut into the bedrock beneath the pyramid and subsequently filled with masonry. If this pit weren't there, and the lower part of the inclined corridor didn't extend into it, no such correspondence would have occurred. However, the pit is there, and for some reason the corridor descends into it. Another interesting point. In Djoser's pyramid, a staircase descends at an angle to the inner shaft. However, it emerges into the shaft not at the lowest point, but higher up. This exit point of the staircase precisely matches the level of the floor of the chamber of the Meidum pyramid, and the corridor leading above matches the level of the first step of the Meidum pyramid. Its sloping corridor even contains a niche at this level, indicating that an intermediate stage of construction ended here. And finally, a very important detail, the corridor of the Meidum pyramid rises exactly to the level of the base of Djoser's pyramid. Thus, there is no doubt that the project of the Meidum pyramid was in fact based on the project of Djoser's pyramid and was a development of it. The bent pyramid was built next. Its upper corridor faces west and its lower corridor faces north. But for clarity, we'll do the following. Let's rotate its upper system 90 degrees around the vertical axis so that both corridors face the same direction. We can afford this simplification for now, since we're interested in horizontal levels, not cardinal directions. Let's compare this drawing with the drawing of the Meidum pyramid. We see that not only the lower levels of the systems, but also the uppermost points of the corridors match. Another interesting point. In the upper chamber of the bent pyramid, we see a superstructure constructed of carefully laid small blocks. It was built in 2 stages, and the upper stage is elevated 6.5 meters above the chamber floor. The chamber of the Meidum pyramid is also elevated by exactly the same 6.5 meters above the lower section of the corridor. Therefore, when comparing the drawings, we see that they are at the same level. And again, in this comparison, the lower corridor of the bent pyramid rises exactly to the level of the base of the Meidum pyramid. You must agree that all these coincidences cannot be random. Thus, here too, the continuity of the designs of these 2 pyramids is clearly evident. And again, we see that the bent pyramid has had a lower section added compared to the Meidum pyramid. We will skip the red pyramid for now. And let's move straight to the Khufu pyramid and compare it with the bent pyramid. I already mentioned the coincidence of the chamber levels, but look at the inclined shafts. In previous videos, I suggested that they were laid over inclined ramps. That is, they were constructed exactly like the inclined corridors in other pyramids. I think that is why the angle of their inclination is maintained so precisely, despite the fact that from the top view, they are not at all straight. Notice the levels at which they begin and end. These levels are practically identical to the corridors in the bent pyramid. In my opinion, given the continuity of designs I just demonstrated, the presence of these ramps there is now beyond any doubt. Also, it becomes absolutely clear that the lower shafts were designed this way and end exactly where they were originally planned. That is, they were never intended to reach the pyramid's surface. And of course, following established tradition, the highest point of the descending corridor was chosen for a reason. However, this time it is not at the base of the bent pyramid, but at the level of its lower system. And again, we see that in Khufu's pyramid, it is the lower part that is added compared to the bent pyramid. Agree, even based on the results of a comparison of the internal structure of these pyramids, we can say that the theory of a single design principle appears very reasonable. And we can trace a clear sequence from the Pyramid of Djoser to the Pyramid of Khufu. Moreover, what is very important is that for each subsequent pyramid, a lower part was added compared to the previous one. Now let's look at another invaluable source of information, a height map of the Khufu Pyramid's stone courses. On this map, taller rows are colored red, while shorter rows are colored blue. As you can easily see, the rows of blocks in the Great Pyramid's main masonry vary in height, and this height changes in a rather odd manner. How can this be explained? Why was it convenient to deliver blocks of the same size both here and here? And here or here, for example, blocks several times lighter were used. In my opinion, such a situation could only arise in one case. Two different lifting methods were used. The first allowed the blocks to be raised to a certain fixed level. Whether this was done along the side of the pyramid or along internal or external ramps is not important now. And after this, a second method was used, in which the weight of the block was highly dependent on the height to which it needed to be further lifted. Using this second method, the masonry level was gradually raised to the next stage. After that, the main lifting system was rebuilt, and the cycle of building up was repeated. This is, of course, a simplified picture, but I think that the information we have is sufficient not only to understand the routes and methods used to lift the blocks, but even to assess the basic parameters of these methods. We'll definitely discuss this in future videos, but for now, it's important to note the presence of these stages. Pay attention to the very last one. It's clear that the builders were able to lift heavy blocks weighing up to 3 tons up to this level, and the upper part was created from much smaller blocks. By the way, do you know what that small pyramid is we see above? Almost all pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties fit this pattern, with the exception of the Pyramid of Nefertari. Agree, this is quite an interesting coincidence. But an even more interesting coincidence emerges if we add a drawing of the bent pyramid. It's at this level that the bend in its faces occurs. I think you already understand the reason. The primary method of lifting blocks during its construction only worked up to this level, so the volume of the upper part was significantly reduced. Also, notice how the top points of the bent pyramid corridors align with the stages on this map. Another interesting detail, both corridors of the bent pyramid have points with a vertical joint in the masonry. This joint even caused a shift in the blocks in the lower corridor. How could such joints have appeared? Clearly, these corridors were built in 2 stages. First, the main section was built, then the remaining section was added. These points also align with the stages on the map of the Khufu Pyramid's stone courses. But that's not all. Let's briefly return to the inclined shafts, which we analyzed in the previous video. We discussed, among other things, the fact that these channels still contain traces of plugs. In the upper southern shaft, this is an expansion with a groove, and in the lower southern shaft, there are remains of mortar on the walls. This means that the same plugs we now see at the end of the lower shafts were in these positions for some time. Let's plot these points on our drawing. See, they perfectly match the levels we marked for the corridors of the bent pyramid. This tells us that these inclined shafts were also constructed in stages, and that these stages, for some reason, coincide with the stages of construction of the corridors of the bent pyramid. We also see a similar picture for the red pyramid. But the most interesting thing is that these coincidences even exist for the corridors of pyramids built after Khufu's pyramid. The Pyramid of Khafre, the Pyramid of Menkaure, the Pyramid of Nefertari, pharaoh of the 5th dynasty. You must admit that it's simply astonishing how different pyramids fit so precisely onto this map of the Khufu Pyramid's stone courses. And these are far from all the coincidences. In a more detailed analysis, I will show you other interesting points. So, let's summarize. We see a clear continuity of projects from the Pyramid of Djoser to the Pyramid of Khufu. And the project evolved downwards, and a lower part was added to each subsequent pyramid compared to the previous one. Moreover, we also see that the top points of the corridors of different pyramids for some reason coincide with the stages on the map of the Khufu Pyramid's stone courses. And these coincidences occur even for pyramids built after the Great Pyramid. What could be the reason for such a strange connection between the designs of all these structures? And why is it necessary to align the pyramids precisely at their apexes to see it? I am certain that the answer to this question is the key to unraveling the mystery of the Egyptian pyramids. And if you haven't yet figured out what it is, I think you'll be surprised by how this answer is simple. Imagine you've somehow managed to build your first small pyramid, and now you want to build the next one, but larger. What's the easiest way to do this? You need to figure out how to build a new lower section, and then how to lift the blocks to build the upper section. If you've done this, the problem is solved because you already know how to build the upper part. And for the next, even larger pyramid, you'll have to repeat this cycle once more. And then again. You might say this seems childishly primitive. I completely agree. That's what I like about this idea. This is exactly how people who initially had no knowledge and experience in building structures of this scale would reason. Therefore, I think that the version about the builder's desire to experiment is fundamentally wrong. In fact, it was exactly the opposite. The pyramid builders were afraid of making mistakes, so they used the design of the previous pyramid as much as possible when designing the next one. Only in this way could they guarantee the desired result. The design of the first pyramid, the Pyramid of Djoser, resembles a patchwork quilt. Its construction process consisted of several distinct independent stages. It was impromptu, a trial-and-error process. And when it came to building a pyramid of significantly greater size, the architects had no way to come up with anything fundamentally new. They didn't have technical universities or textbooks on strength of materials. They didn't even have blueprints in the modern sense. They could only modify the existing design, adding a lower section, and then repeat the process again and again. We're constantly amazed at how the builders were able to so precisely design these enormous structures and organize their construction. Here's how. Each time they tried to rework an existing project, taking into account the experience of its implementation. Of course, the builders tried to eliminate the main shortcomings, improving the skills and training methods of workers, perfecting the pyramid's geometry control methods, and optimizing the methods of transporting, lifting, and processing blocks. The type of masonry changed, and the average block size gradually increased. But the main stages of construction remained unchanged and were located vertically relative to the tops of all the pyramids at the same distance. This is, in fact, what we see when comparing the drawings. As a result, Khufu's pyramid became the apogee of this upward movement. That is, its project is in fact the most complete and in one way or another includes the projects of all previous pyramids. It should be noted, however, that we barely examined the Red Pyramid in this video, but we will definitely return to it in the second part, as well as to the pyramids built after Khufu's pyramid. What conclusions can we draw from all of the above, and what doors will this newly discovered key help us open? The first and most important conclusion, of course, is obvious. It is that all Egyptian pyramids must be considered as a whole, not as individual structures, for they are a single sequence of objects, largely created according to a common, constantly evolving design. And we have just understood the fundamental principle of this design's development. But there's another, less obvious, yet crucial point. Ask yourself a question. Why did all these elements of the internal structure need to be copied at all, transferred from one pyramid to another? If they were simply ritual chambers, then does it matter where they are located? If these corridors were needed only to carry the pharaoh's body through them once, then why are they so tied to the construction stages of all the pyramids? Why was the shaft from Djoser's pyramid transferred to the Meidum Pyramid project? What was the original purpose of this shaft? I'm sure there's one simple answer to all these questions. These internal elements of the pyramids are directly related to the process of their construction. And this is the door behind which all the answers are hidden. If all the pyramids were built according to a single design, then the builders of the different pyramids solved the same problems and used similar methods. And most importantly, elements located in the same places in different pyramids most likely performed similar functions. Now I will give you one very clear example, the meaning of which we will discuss in the next part. Let's look again at the drawing of Djoser's pyramid. As I already mentioned, in this place, the staircase is raised above the bottom of the shaft, which you must admit looks somewhat unusual. At the same place in the Meidum pyramid, the chamber is raised to the same height using a vertical tunnel. And again, the builders clearly did this for a reason. At this same location in the bent pyramid, the upper chamber has a two-tiered superstructure, raising the floor level by the same 6.5 meters. Even higher are the hewn steps of the false vault. A mound of stones led to the upper edge of this vault. Thus, we have a clear step-by-step increase in the level in this chamber. And this increase was so important and necessary that the builders even hewed down the already completed false vault ceiling to achieve it. Thus, it is obvious that in this place, in all these pyramids, the builders, for some reason, needed to gradually raise the floor level. Now, let's move on to the Khufu pyramid. Look, we see essentially the same thing in this location in the Great Pyramid. Above the king's chamber, there are so-called relieving chambers, which in fact do not relieve anything, and their purpose is still debated. You'll agree that, given the clear continuity in the designs of these pyramids, it's logical to assume that these beams serve the same function as the superstructure in the upper chamber of the bent pyramid. Only in the Khufu pyramid, this gradual increase in level was accomplished much more thoroughly, using granite beams. At the beginning of this video, I said that the pyramids are messages that we need to learn to read. And there's a very important meaning in this beautiful phrase. The point is that these messages essentially contain the same text, but each time it's written slightly differently. In other words, all the Egyptian pyramids together, to some extent, represent one giant Rosetta Stone, and we've just found the key to deciphering it. Dear friends, write in the comments what you think about the ideas presented in this video. And of course, if you liked the video, click like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for your time and attention.